motion has been agreed to. The next item on the order paper is a motion in the name of the Honorable N.F. Shibambu. Honorable members, I've been informed that the Honorable J.S. Malema will take charge of the motion in terms of Assembly Rule 93. The Honorable Malema.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, and the leadership of the EFF. This is a motion that seeks to unite black people in South Africa. And ordinarily, if leadership was provided, we shouldn't be having this debate, because the land should have been returned into the hands of the rightful owners. We all know that the Dutch gangsters arrived here and took our land by force. And the struggle has since been about the return of the land into the hands of rightful owners. Yet those who went to negotiate on behalf of our people during the negotiations sold out this fundamental principle which constituted the struggle against colonialism. So those who claim to be radical enough and who want radical change today should actually be in the forefront of agreeing that this constitution must be changed to make it possible for our people to own the land. It can't be correct that the less than 10% of the population owns almost more than 75% of the land. And those people who own the land happen to be, in an acceptable language, private people like individuals, trusts, and companies. But when you search deep as to who are these people, these are white people who are still owning our land. We remain a conquered nation, even when we claim to have democracy. We remain a conquered nation because white monopoly capital still owns the means of production, and at the center of that is the land question. The dominance of white people, it cannot go away, particularly white supremacy, for as long as land is not returned into the hands of the people. We are the only country where we say revolution has taken place, yet those who were oppressing us have not lost anything after the revolution. We remain as we were even before 1994. So we are saying that black people, all of us, we need to unite and amend the constitution so that we can expropriate land without compensation. There is no white person who will understand that clarion call, because they don't know the pain of being landless. Only those who have gone through a passage of being landless will appreciate where we come from on the issue of the land. The issue of the land cannot be a campaigning issue. The issue of the land cannot be a rhetorical question. The issue of the land should be an issue of commitment. Honorable members, we have taken an oath here. And when we take an oath, we are simply saying we are loyal to the land. But how can we be loyal to the land which is in the hands of private individuals? We must be loyal to the land that belongs to us. Majority of our people say South Africa belongs to them, yet they do not have proof to show that indeed South Africa belongs to them, because many of them do not even know how a title deed looks like. Many generations died without even knowing how a title deed looks like. It is only through the expropriation of land without compensation that our people will be the rightful owners of this country. We cannot keep on saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, yet we have nothing to show. Today, the ANC should come with the EFF. There is 6% available. We give it to you without no condition to amend the constitution and take the land.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. You know, the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act When it was first enacted, it basically took ownership of all mineral rights from private companies to the state and gave those rights to individual mining private licenses which had conditions. Now, the amendment which was passed by the Fourth Democratic Parliament, the amendment bill which we're dealing with now, the state must have a degree of ownership and control. But also it was beginning to say that the Minister of Mineral Resources, if that person is a regional person, unlike the current one, can then determine the amount of minerals that can be exported from South Africa so that we give space for the local beneficiation and industrialization of mineral resources. And then the president of the ANC brought that bill back to Parliament without having signed it. Of course, 2.5 years ago, to say that we must check if it is constitutional for that bill to be passed without being compliant to some international trade agreements, and two, without consulting the House of Trade, to the adoption and passing of the minerals and petroleum resources development to laws in South Africa. The real reason why the act was brought back to be dealt with here in Parliament is because the Guptas had said that it cannot be. And then we entertained those processes as early as 2015. I was in the Committee of Minerals which dealt with this question, that said that before Zwane arrived here, which said that there is nothing unconstitutional with the MPRDA bill as amended. But we're only coming back now to pass an act, and we've waited for 2.5 years without proper legislation that guides the mineral sector.
Honorable.
The capture that we're talking about, yes.
Hold on, take your seat. Yes. What are you raising, honorable member?
There is no Zwane here, there is honorable.
Speaker,
Honorable
Minister
Dlozi,
Malusi Gigaba
I can't
is
be
a
calling on
liar.
you forever.
He's
the
a
whole
pathological
afternoon.
liar.
Honorable
That is what
Dlozi,
he is.
If you don't withdraw, then I'll have to ask you to leave the room.
No, Speaker. I can't leave the room on the basis of a court decision.
No, because I'm asking you to withdraw that here in this house, not in court.
This is a free house.
I'm talking about
I am protected by the Constitution to repeat court decisions
Honorable Dlozi,
that Gigaba is a
please
liar.
withdraw.
Speaker, I'm unable to withdraw the truth.
Then withdraw from the chamber.
Speaker, I can't leave because I'm speaking
withdraw
the
from
truth.
the chamber. If you are not going to do, assist Honorable Dlozi.
But the fact of the matter is
to
that
elegantly leave the house.
is a liar.
Can I ask the Sergeant at Arms to help Honorable Dlozi to leave the house?
How else do we say that Malusi Gigaba is a liar?
Mama, I hope that you pray for us. Hope you do it every day for us.
Quality, it was action-packed, it looked like a Vice field piece, but this time, the subject was white genocide, so you know it's full of shit. Now, this film was part of the international white nationalist propaganda effort on the internet, and it took a very controversial issue like land reappropriation in post-apartheid South Africa, which already has extremely high rates of violence and racism, and turned it into agitative propaganda. So naturally, Tucker would take on this cause since, you know, he's the most mainstream representative of white nationalist fascists.
The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has begun seizing land from his own citizens without compensation because they are the wrong skin color.
And now our president is repeating this white nationalist nonsense because he saw it on Tucker Carlson, because that's the world we live in. But let's talk about the facts. First of all, South Africa is the only country with a worse record than the US when it comes to white colonization and racism, since they held on to a system of legalized segregation called apartheid until 1994. And as a result of this racist system, more than 70% of the population was crammed into 13% of the shittiest land. And even after the apartheid officially ended, white colonizers still owned 90% of the land, despite making only 10% of the population. And by 2017, 25 years after failed land reform, after the apartheid was over, white people still owned 72% of the land. So when Tucker talks about land seizures, without mentioning the fact that black people previously owned that land, well,
that is literally the definition of racism.
Now, according to Tucker, the South African government trying to bring some sort of justice after centuries of colonization, rapes, violence, and discrimination in a majority black country is the literal definition of racism. It's not the brutal systemic disenfranchisement of black people in their own country. That's just normal stuff. Trying to correct that problem now, that's what really grinds my gear.
Comes at a time when government could least afford to lose investor confidence. Investment certainty leads to capital accumulation, which leads to more employment and higher productivity. An assault on private property leads to investment uncertainty and economic decline. In 2015, for the first time on record, South Africans began investing more abroad than foreigners invest in South Africa, a sure sign of loss of investor confidence. Claiming that property rights would be eroded and that economic freedom would be compromised in a way that would enhance economic development is like claiming that KFC would be expanded in a way that would ensure that chickens would prosper. Those who are calling for the erosion of property rights have not been able to provide any evidence on why a more aggressive implementation of an already failed policy would lead to anything other than a more aggressive failure. Mr. Chairperson, this is Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results.
So in our capital structure, we've got money, then we've got debt, and then we've got financial assets, things like stocks, bonds, and other types of negotiable instruments. And then at the same time, we've got the capital assets, the plant, machinery, land, property, immovable property, and the factors that are utilized by people to actually make capital, to actually make money capital. So who owns the capital in South Africa? And for us to start, let us start by looking at the money aspect of the capital, money and the debt aspect. So in South Africa, we've got three types of money: coins, notes, and debt. Our banks in general have about 4 to 5% of the money in circulation in coins and notes. However, there is another 95% of this money that is debt. And that debt is all created by banks. Now, the banks that create most of the debt in South Africa are known as commercial banks. They create anything between 80% and 85% of the debt in South Africa. And with this debt that they create it and grow the money supply. They grow the money supply in South Africa. They grow the money that is available for people to borrow in order to buy assets and in order to buy capital assets that can make money. So let's see who creates this money into the system. The person responsible for creating money into the system, or the institution responsible for creating money into the system, is the Reserve Bank of South Africa. However, the Reserve Bank of South Africa prints the notes and they produce the coins, but they only create 6% of debt. And they're usually the debt the lender of last resort. All the other debt is created by the banks in the system. Now, in these banks, we've got the commercial banks. They're private-owned banks. And there's 5 of them in South Africa. They create 80 to 85% of the debt that we have. So this is debt for mortgages, cars, and for businesses that want to borrow in order to buy plant, machinery, business premises, to construct buildings, to construct factories, and the like, and even to finance deals, imports, and those kind of facilities. Then we've got a bit of debt that is also then created by your agri-bank, land bank, and your agri-bank, your IDC, and these are the government-owned banks. But the majority of the debt is created by the commercial banks. Now, the commercial banks are privately owned, and then the Reserve Bank that regulates them is also privately owned. The Reserve Bank that also creates our notes and creates our coins is privately owned. And the private ownership has got shareholders. And the shareholders that hold shares in the Reserve Bank are the commercial banks. There are other private shareholders, but the biggest shareholders to the Reserve Bank are the commercial banks. But
we answered Minister Rob Davies' question when we were talking about white minority capital. And for 18 years, I was part of white minority capital. It's alive. I'm part of it. I'm now standing on the other side. White minority capital exists. I'm a white guy. I know it. I meet the people. So let's declare it today at this conference. It's alive. So let's not mix words here. We meet, we greet, we have lunches, and we debate. Klaar. So people like my level, we meet, coffee shops, and we talk rara. It's time not to see white minority capital as a negative. You have the money, what are you going to do with it? So I think hand the money back and give the people, instead of white minority capital, black majority capital. Let's go to WMC. Ons het die geld, man. Kom ons gee net die geld vir meer mense. Plain and simply, we pumped 2 billion as an entity into Africa. Yes, you can look. As an ANC member for 29 years of my life, I've come back because it's time to plow back. You want us to break monopoly and monopoly businesses in this country. Those are banking, construction, finance, agriculture, and mining. And if you want us to make black majority capital survive, then help us build construction companies that are owned by black people, funded by us, and give them the tenders so that they can compete with the big companies. So the question here, in finalization, not to pay also a credit card loan at the back, because I contribute to the PPF, is Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, EFF leadership, members of the House, fellow South Africans. Almost 400 years ago, a criminal by the name of Jan van Riebeeck landed in our native land and declared an already occupied land by the native population as a no man's land. Van Riebeeck, the first descendant of the Dutch to arrive in the Cape, will later lead a full-blown colonial genocide, anti-black land dispossession criminal project, arguing that simply because our people could not produce title deeds, this land that they have been living in for more than 1,000 years was not their own. Essentially, he was disregarding their humanity, treating them as part of the animal world. To him, and many who would have come long after him, the Africans were less than human, not deserving of land ownership. On this basis, the project disempowering Africans of the ability to call this place their land was initiated in blood and in pain. Millions ended up in the humiliated, conquered township condition of being cheap and easily disposable labor. Cecil Rhodes, Paul Kruger, John Smarts, General Herzog, Verwoerd, Botha, even de Klerk, all labored on the Van Riebeeck assumption that Africans are less than human, They all, one after another, assaulted the humanity of African, keeping them dispossessed of land as cheap and easily disposable labor. Since those painful days when the Khoi of the Cape were defeated and conquered at the establishment of the Cape Colony to the area of the 1,800 with expansion of colonial control into the hinterlands. The days of the Battle of Ngome River in 1838 against the Zulu people, the Battle of Mariko River in 1837 against Mzilikazi in north of Transvaal, the attacks of Tababusiu of King Mushweshwe in 1865, the village raids of Bavenda that led to heroic resistance by King Makado in 1867, the capture and imprisonment of the Khoi chiefs in Robben Island fighting for land in 1870 up to the Land Act of 1913. Colonial crimes against humanity of native population did not end there. With the Land Act of 1913, they continued through the forced removals of the Group Areas Act that displaced millions of black people to live in prison camps we now call township. The so-called township is not a settlement of human beings, it's a prison camp. Those who came in power in 1994, carrying the popular mandate of our people to restore the dignity of African child by reinstating land to the dispossessed, forgot their mandate. They became drunk in luxury and glory, building false reconciliation without justice. It took the formation of the EFF 20 years later to revive the question of the dignity of our people in the need for our land. It took the arrival of the EFF in these chambers to return in the central agenda of human freedom the need for the land that was dispossessed through a brutal crimes against humanity. The time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice. If the grandchildren of Jan van Riebeck have not understood that we need our land, that over and above it is about our dignity, then they fail to receive the gift of humanity. We do not seek revenge, though they caused so much evil in our land. We do not wish for their suffering, though they caused so much humiliation of countless generations. All we want, all our people ever wanted, is their land to which their dignity is rooted and founded. Today, let us close this question once and for all. Let us unite and pay no one for benefiting from the crimes against humanity. Let us come together and agree on this noble, historic and human call to expropriate land without compensation for equal redistribution. Many want us to debate food security and economic development, but how can we do so when we do not have the land? They want us to come to the table with the bosses and as beggars, because that is unacceptable. The ability to develop policies on food security depend on land redistribution, not the other way around. Those who hold the land labor on the false idea that to distribute it, we must first establish a food security program. No, we must distribute the land. Then we can all talk about food security program. We invite you to engage, not to pick up spears and guns. We invite you to come to the table and realize that nothing means anything for our people except their dignity in the land ownership. For a lasting peace, security, and justice, land must be expropriated without compensation for equal redistribution. Would have failed those who came before us if we were to pay anyone for having committed a genocide. We cannot thank them for having killed innocent people who were fighting to protect their own land. Many people say people who came here, they were running away from their own problems in Europe, and our people welcomed them here in South Africa. It is not true. Why would you engage in a program to kill people who have welcomed you? Those who are saying we must pay for the land are actually arguing us that we must thank those who killed our people, because those who did so They did so with an intention of wiping out a black generation. We must ensure that we restore the dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land. Those who continue to protect these crimes are themselves accused of crime, because those who protect crime are criminals themselves. All of us must come together and say, enough is enough. Our people must get the land. We have offered the ANC our 6% to amend the constitution, and that 6% still stands to the African National Congress. We want to say to the ANC, it is now an opportune moment, since you have agreed in your conference to amend the constitution. Anyone who says we cannot expropriate land without compensation, without amending the constitution, that person is misleading us. Because if that was the case, the ANC would have long expropriated this land without compensation. So we need to amend the constitution, and we must do so unashamedly. It is not unconstitutional to amend the constitution. It is constitutional to amend the constitution. That's why the constitution makes such a provision. We must stop being cowards. We must stop egg walking around the white minorities who are governed by the fear of the unknown when it comes to the question of land expropriation without compensation. The investors of this in this country just want a policy certainty. Once we say we're expropriating without compensation, there is no investor who will leave the country. They will look at our policy and say, how do we continue to make money within the expropriated land? So those who don't agree will continue to ridicule our struggle, because they never suffered the pain of losing land. They don't know how it means to lose land. So we're saying to all political parties,